Good morning, Highlands Presbyterian. So we press on today, moving into Esther chapter 5. In our story, there gets more and more intrigue, and it builds and it builds and it builds. And I think about intrigue, I think about drama, and yesterday happened to be the beginning of college football season, which has often all of that built in as well. And I feel like it's probably still too soon to talk about it with the onset of college football season. This past week, I was at a dinner where we started talking about the Buckeyes last season and the Peach Bowl, and I was there, and we started talking about what a great game it was, except for that little detail where they missed the field goal at the end of the game and lost. Everything else was fantastic, but I'd have to change that little detail to really call it a great game from my perspective. And it's like the old joke, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you like the play? We all have things like that in life. Maybe you had a meal where everything was perfect except for one little detail. I once went to dinner at this great restaurant, had this fantastic meal, except for the little part where I got food poisoning the next day. And I was on a 5-hour flight across the country to come home. Not great. We've been on vacations where everything was great except for the weather. You've maybe had a job where everything was great except for a boss or a certain coworker. You know the feeling. You just need to tweak one little thing, and then things will be great. And it's easy to go through life with this mindset. You're climbing the ladder towards your goals, and you're one rung away, one step away, but then you get there, and there's something else beyond that. Caleb and I were hiking on a trail this summer, and we'd never been on it before, and there were all these staircases, and every time you got to the staircase at the top of the hill, you thought you were going to be there, and then there was another one, and then there was another one, and then there was another one. It's carried on and on and on. A little bit farther, just one more corner, just a little bit more. That's an exactly example of how our appetites for anything work, and there's always shifting goalposts, and you always need to want just a little bit more. And so keep that thought in the back of your mind as we turn to Esther 5. Quick recap of where we've been. Our villain Haman has convinced King Xerxes to kill all the Jews in the entire Persian Empire because he's mad at Esther's cousin Mordecai, who won't bow down to Haman. Mordecai has convinced Esther to risk her life, to plead to King Xerxes so the Jews will be saved. And so Esther is about to walk unbidden into the throne room, and if King Xerxes doesn't lift his golden scepter towards her, that will be the end of the sermon series, and the Bible will go right on into the book of Job. But before she enters the throne room, she asks Mordecai to have all the Jews in Susa, the capital city, join her in fasting and prayer as she prepares for her ordeal. And she goes in the throne room, and God grants her favor, God grants her success, and the king offers up anything up to half of his kingdom, which is an interesting offer that you see sometimes. This is the same offer that in Mark 6, when Herodias' daughter dances, before Herod, and Herodias' daughter brings such delight that he makes her the same offer, up to half of his kingdom. She asked for John the Baptist's head on a platter. Really charming. Esther has a better request. She asked King Xerxes to attend a banquet with just 3 people, Esther, Xerxes, and Haman. Haman is delighted to have such an offer. He's so focused on his wealth, his power, his prestige. He wants to be well thought of, which, right, we all do. We want others to think highly of us. We want others to say good things about us when we're not around. Haman is an example of this taken to extremes. He wants it so badly that if any little thing goes wrong, it drives him crazy. And this is what happens when Mordecai refuses to bow down to him, and this is getting on Haman's last nerve. And Haman is like, he looks at his life in Persia and he thinks, oh, this would be perfect if only there could be one tiny detail changed. if we could get rid of this guy Mordecai who won't bow down to me. And Haman says, to get rid of Mordecai, I want to get rid of all the Jews in all of the empire because they're not going to bow down to me and recognize me as being powerful and being prestigious. And so Haman, despite having been invited to this incredibly exclusive dinner, he sees Mordecai, he gets so upset. And then he looks to console himself. And we all have different ways of doing this. Maybe you go for a walk. Maybe you find comfort food and comfort food is great, right? We eat and we eat and we eat. We stress eat, and then we feel badly physically after we've done that, and then likely we go back to feeling bad emotionally. But for a time there, it works great. Maybe when you're mad, you stop and you think about all of the good things you have going on in life, and you focus on gratitude. And that's sort of what Haman does, only to the extreme. He gathers all of his friends, he gathers his wife, and he tells them about all of his wealth and prestige and how the king likes him. I mean, it's amazing. I sort of laughed at the idea of inviting friends to marvel at how wonderful you are and what about money and power and success. And then I realized that's basically what Facebook is. So Haman was an early influencer, talking about how great his life is. And there's a fascinating line from Haman here. And remember, Haman is basically second in power in all of the Persian Empire. He's incredibly close to the king. His future is in great hands. Like everything, it's great to be Haman. But listen to what he says about himself. He says, all this is not worth my while, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting in the king's gate. All this great stuff, all this power, all this wealth, all this prestige, all this I have is not worth my while. I think one of the lessons here, right, is let us not be convinced that the outside trappings of someone's life reflect their inner state. We assume that people who have wealth and money and power are always happy, and often find out that they're not. They're going through all sorts of things. We're all dealing with all sorts of things. And Haman, despite being the second most powerful person in the kingdom, is just being eaten alive by Mordecai's refusal to submit to him. Haman's wife makes this lovely suggestion that a giant stake be set up so that Mordecai's corpse could be displayed on that after Haman has him killed, and Haman is very happy with this idea. Isn't love great when spouses work together? But again, it's just so tragic, right? Haman is so powerful. This empire stretches from India in the east to Ethiopia in the west, and he says none of it's worthwhile. He'd give it all up because he's so mad about Mordecai's refusal to do what Haman wants. And it's just a reminder, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, there will always be little things that get in the way of being happy in the moment. And when we measure our life by how happy we are, we're always going to discover there's always something that's imperfect. There's always some fly in the soup, some strange thing in the background of the photos that would be otherwise perfect. Happiness is relative. It depends on your surroundings, and there's always something imperfect with the surroundings. And I look at Esther, and I look at Mordecai, who have this incredibly challenging situation that they're trying to deal with, of how to keep the Jews from being killed. And there's something deeper here. I mean, think about Esther. She's willing to risk her life on behalf of her people. She asked them to fast with her for 3 days. And so she hasn't eaten, and there's something else that sustains her as she walks into the king's throne room. Far deeper than a surface happiness that's dependent on everything going right. Esther has this deep joy, far deeper than happiness. And we see this as people talk about it throughout the years. Plato talked about true joy found in the contemplation of eternal and unchanging truths, transcending the transient pleasures of the physical world. Transcending the physical pleasures. Joy exists deep in the soul, not shaken by the day to day. Joy is a ballast. It's the keel of the sailboat that helps keep things steady in the storm. Joy is the fruit of the Holy Spirit. associated with a deep sense of spiritual connection, gratitude, and hope in God's grace. And joy and hope are so closely linked. Augustine, Aquinas are theologians that explored the relationship between joy and love in God. Joy is a confidence in God's deliverance, in God's power, in God's wisdom. What else could give Esther the ability to walk into a throne room where she very well might be killed for her actions? It'd have to be a deep certainty that God was with her and that there was still hope no matter what happens. And it makes me think of the writer in Hebrews in chapter 12 who writes, Jesus, founder, perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Joy that was set before Christ allowed him to endure the most challenging trial that any human has ever been through. Esther, facing death, able to walk into the throne room with her head held high. Jesus, facing death, had such joy that he's able to endure the cross. What is this joy? How do we get such joy? And to understand it, we have to be willing to see the world upside down. We have to be willing to look through happiness. Happiness isn't a bad thing. It's a wonderful gift. But we all know that we'll lose it. Happiness is the moments before you miss a field goal to win a football game. It's the great meal before the food poisoning. It's the beach before the sunburn. Happiness inevitably fades. It's stolen away by something. And to be a Christian is to know that happiness is going to fade, but to see the God who will redeem all of it and sustain us throughout this, whether we're in happy times or not. It's Adam and Eve banished from the garden, having lost it all and seen God provide animal skins and begin to make a way back into a right relationship. It's Moses trapped between the Egyptian army and the sea and seeing God divide the waters to make a way through. It's Esther walking into the possibility of death and knowing God will deliver her regardless. It's Christ knowing he's going to suffer the full weight of human sin and yet knowing he'll overcome all of it and ending up in a place of eternal joy. That's joy. That's true joy. Hope in the midst of whatever your circumstances are, whenever your happiness is robbed of being able to hold on to hope. And the question is, how do we find more of this in our lives? I was thinking about this yesterday after the men's outing at the shotgun club. And 4 of us went and we broke clay pigeons together. Not all of them, but some. And I was thinking about how invaluable it is to have relationships in the world where if everything falls apart, I could call any of them, I could call any of you, and you would remind me that this is not the end. That no matter how badly things might go in my life, any of you would remind me that the promises of God transcend anything I face in this life. What's that worth? That is a treasure more than gold. You couldn't price that in the stock market. No bank can tell you what that's worth. So many people are missing that in society. They don't have anyone to remind them that they are eternally loved, no matter what. So that things happen when spoil happiness. People can get lost. They don't know what to do. And there's plenty of things out there in the world offering to be an addiction to dull pain. And what we have here in this community of faith is a bunch of people who remind one another that the things that rob our happiness can't steal our joy. Because our joy is anchored in the bedrock of Jesus Christ, the founder and perfecter of our faith. And what was the joy of Christ? What was the joy? What did he get by going through the trial of the cross that he didn't already have? He had you. That's what he endured it for. That was the only thing he didn't have before the cross that he had afterwards. He got you. And that's the joy that was set in front of him. And that then, right, should give us joy. Joy in the community, joy in one another. Because that's what we get as a part of the church. And in our reading from 1 Timothy today, Paul talks about the longing to see Timothy that he may be filled with joy. He longs to see him. Friends, may we be filled with joy at the sight of our fellow Christians. And may we find more ways to connect, more ways to serve one another, more ways to invite others to come and find a sense of community here. And develop that bedrock joy that anchors all of us, that allows us to walk into any room, to face any fear with a kind of confidence in the baptized children of God that will live forever in God's kingdom. That's joy. May we spread that.